Well, Brian, it's been since 2020 since we got together, did a video with spring ball around the corner. The schedule came out earlier this week. Figured it was a good time to catch up. How has life been for you?
It's been pretty much the same as 2020. A lot of being at home, but I think there's some good things. I mean, there's some positive things. I know our kids are in the same school district, so a lot of things as far as kids going back to school and things like that. So there's some positive things and some basketball going on, things like that. But it's been fairly quiet, and that's not too bad.
We've got our first glimpse of temperatures in the 60s, and that's helped my mental sanity here recently. Just now that the weather is going to change a little bit, easier to get outside and everything. But let's react to the schedule. Obviously, we knew that it was going to be a tough non-conference slate for Colorado, one of only two teams in the Pac-12 that are playing multiple games against Power 5 opponents in the non-conference. Stanford's actually going to play three. And we knew who Colorado was going to play in conference play, but we didn't know how the schedule was going to lay out. What were just your initial impressions when the schedule came out? I'll say real quick for myself, I always look at when is that game in Arizona going to come on the schedule, because whether it's going to Tucson or Tempe, they play down there every year. And unfortunately, they have to start down there this year.
Yeah.
And, the average temperature on September 25th when they're set to travel down there is 97. So that part of it I wasn't a big fan of, at least from a traveling media standpoint. And for the team, that's going to be a little bit of an adjustment going down there.
Yeah, and you always know those late games when I'm traveling down there is all right. I'll go to bed about 4 o'clock in the morning, so it's gonna be a late game there. But certainly a tough schedule. I mean, I think you mentioned Stanford. I mean, they've got a brutal schedule. I think Stanford's the only team in the Pac-12 that has a tougher first 5 weeks than the Buffs, and certainly the Buffs have UNC, and I don't want to discount UNC because who knows what they're gonna look like with Ed McCaffrey and Dylan McCaffrey, but that should be a win. But that 4 week stretch after that, I mean, you have Texas A&M, you have Minnesota, who I expect to be better than they were this past year in a pandemic, and then you have at ASU and then USC at home. I mean, that's a brutal 4 game stretch, and I mean, there's not another team in the Pac-12 that has a worse, well, aside from Stanford, that has a tougher first 5 games. So,
and then you got to play four. Then you got to play 4 of your last 6 on the road.
Right. So I mean, initially you look at it, we knew going in, like, okay, the Buffs have 7 games in the state of Colorado. They have to leave the state 5 times. But now you look at it and say, well, 4 of those are in the last 6 weeks. So, that's a tough stretch. So the Buffs have got to figure out a way to pile up some wins at home early in the season. And that's going to be tough when one of those is, USC, one of those is Minnesota. Essentially, one of those is Texas A&M. So, that's a tough schedule.
Yeah, and I'm still getting fans that are complaining about the Texas A&M game being played in Denver. I just know there's a lot of CU fans that just don't want to ever play down there. You've done a great job reporting on the financial impacts of that game. And I've also heard that CU kind of had to be flexible there with the game getting canceled out in College Station last year. A&M didn't necessarily have to come to Boulder, after that. Again, last year that game got canceled. So there's more than one reason why they're having to play that game down in Denver.
Yeah, and I'll just let fans know that, look, this was not necessarily a choice between Denver and Boulder. This game could have been in Houston or Dallas because there was some bidding from Houston and Dallas to have this game. So it was probably more likely to be in the state of Texas than it was going to be in Boulder. So fans should actually be grateful that it's in Denver and not going down to Texas. So, there is a financial impact to it, but the fact that the game was canceled last year brought Houston and Dallas into play for this game. And so I think Boulder was almost like the 4th choice and a last resort. And I think the only way it ends up being in Boulder is if, numbers start spiking and they end up, no fans can be there anyway, then maybe they bring it to Boulder. So, it's really, fans just be happy that it's in the state of Colorado, and pack the stadium, get 60,000 Buff fans out there. So, it is a tough one in Denver. I get the fans' point, but you look at a lot of these Power 5 matchups and they're at neutral stadiums. So this isn't really that abnormal in college football right now.
It's called Empower Field now. I think this is the 4th or 5th different name we've called that stadium now.
Yeah, I always just kind of refer to Mile High. I did a schedule analysis yesterday, and I actually had to, for a quick second, look up the name of the stadium because I was blanking on, okay, what's it called now? So yeah, I don't even remember what the original name was. Invesco Field, I think, but I don't even remember what it was.
That was one of the many names it's had, that's for sure. Carl Drell, we haven't had a chance to hop on a Zoom with him since right when they announced the assistant coach hires, but he joined the Pac-12 network, mentioned that Nate Landman is ahead of schedule. Nate Landman's now 11 weeks, 2 days at the recording of this this video here, post-Achilles surgery. I will tell you from experience, Brian, that when you get that boot off, that's when you see the biggest strides in there. But you get to about 75%, and to go from 75% to 100% takes a really, really long time. And we know Nate Landman's going to be chomping at the bit to go. But I would still, even with Carl Drell saying he's ahead of schedule, still tell Colorado fans to kind of temper their expectations in terms of his recovery. It's going to be really, really difficult, and maybe not the right thing for Nate Landman to be out there against UNC. At least I don't think we're going to see 100% of him to start the season.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I've never had that injury, but a more recent example with CU is Tim Lynott, the offensive lineman. But I think it was in 2017 down at ASU, and it was in November. It was a little bit earlier than Nate's was, about 2 or 3 weeks. But Tim came back for the start of the season that next year, and I remember him at that time telling us he felt great, he was excited about it. But in hindsight, he said he didn't feel very good. I mean, throughout the season, he didn't play very well. Yeah. And that was a year that fans remember. He was benched a couple times. He became a part-time starter. I think he actually went through a couple games where he didn't even start. It wasn't until the next year that he felt like himself again. And so he may have felt good coming into camp and the season, things like that, but actually playing and the explosiveness, it wasn't there that first year. So again, I've never had the injury, but I kind of take that and apply that to Nate and sort of expect the same thing. I'm not expecting to see the same Nate Landman that we saw last year in 2021. Now, I hope he proves me wrong, and I hope he looks great this year, but I don't think that it's fair to go in expecting the All-American Nate Landman. Just expect to get the best of what you can get out of Nate Landman and hope that it's really good. But I think that I agree with you. Fans should temper their excitement a little bit and expectations for him a little bit. And for me, that's a big reason why a guy like Jack Lamb is important and why he was brought in. I think you could look at it and say that Lamb was brought in to be that second starter, but I think more so it was some insurance in case Nate Landman can't go. I mean, that's kind of, you look at a few years ago, that's why Davis Webb was brought in. It was sort of insurance in case Sefo Lufau couldn't go. Davis Webb was almost brought in, right? That's what I meant to say. It was supposed to be insurance in case Sefo couldn't go. I sort of think Lamb's the same way. Now, he could start next to Nate, but I think that's a big reason why they brought him in.
Anything I feel like you can get out of Nate Landman at this point is kind of cherry on top of his CU career. I really didn't expect him to come back, and I don't think there's any chance he would have if it was not for that injury. He even kind of tested the waters, thought about it a little bit after the 2019 season. So anything they can get out of him, it would be great to see him, no matter how long the stretch is, just to fly around and see him back to 100%. So he, gets a chance at the next level and maybe can get drafted next year. Another comment that Carl Drell made to the Pac-12 network, talking about their defense, and obviously Chris Wilson has taken over as the defensive coordinator there. He said, there are some changes that we're making that is going to make our defense a lot more player friendly. Brian, we had kind of heard that Tyson Summer's scheme was very challenging, especially for guys that at linebacker positions that need to make calls. Very challenging for them to learn the system. It sounds like that's one of the things that they want to kind of change a little bit with Chris Wilson. You don't want to become too predictable. You still want to be aggressive. There's that fine line in there. But I thought that was an encouraging comment that he made.
Yeah, I thought so too. And I mean, I think back to the 2019 season, Tyson's first year with CU. And, you remember the first few games of that year, Nate wasn't playing. I mean, he was making some tackles, but he was not making those impact plays, those plays behind the line of scrimmage and things like that. And then, if I remember correctly, it was the middle of the season where Nate started doing that. And there was a lot of talk of, well, they've kind of dialed back the system a little bit, and guys are getting more comfortable with it. but also they've dialed it back a little bit. And that's when CU started playing better, is when they kind of dialed back, kind of folded back a little bit what they were doing defensively. And so maybe it was a little bit too complicated for those guys. And I think a lot of times those players just want to go out there and play and not to think too much. And I think that's where we saw Nate get at his best once he really learned that system. He could do that, but you don't have 11 Nate Landmans out there. You've got to have some guys that can get to it quickly. And I think that, a more player-friendly system is going to do that. And so that's encouraging. I agree with you. And, as long as players can pick it up, especially if Nate's not going to be like he was before, they've got to have guys that can just go out there and fly around and play.
There's been a lot of debate among the fan base. Is this going to be a 4-3, a 3-4 defense? They're going to show different looks, Brian. And I think the base defense thing in the last, I don't know how many years, maybe the last decade, it's slowly become less and less important. You see the star hybrid position out there. You've got the money backer. They're going to have a lot of different looks. I think to, try to pigeonhole them into a base defense in terms of, what you're going to expect out of this team, this defense to look, is a mistake, because it's just not the way college football is in 2020/21.
Yeah, and Chris Wilson was recently on CU's Purdue show that they do, and he said that they're going to kind of look at their opponent and try to tailor things to that opponent. So, base defense, I don't know what it's going to look like. I mean, maybe they're a 3-4 team, but I think a lot of times we're going to see them in a 4-down front. We're going to see them with only 2 defensive linemen on the field. So I think they're going to mix it up, and I think we saw some signs of that this last year, where all those defensive linemen and Chris Wilson talked about how they just want to learn everything and not be a defensive end or a nose tackle, that they're just defensive linemen. They go out there and play. So I think Wilson spent this past year kind of set those guys up to where, Terrence Lang can play wherever. And Jalen Sami may be a little bit tougher to move to the end because he's a bigger guy, but he can move to different gaps and things like that. So I think they're going to mix it up.
It's been a pretty quiet offseason in terms of player news, which is good. But Vontae Chenault was ticketed again, and this is the 3rd offense for him. He was suspended on 2 different occasions in 2020. He was ticketed for driving 25 to 39 miles per hour over the speed limit with a restricted license. So none of the infractions Vontae has had would lead you to believe that he's not going to get another opportunity at CU. But as they keep happening, you're worried about just kind of how he's maturing at CU, and you wonder about his future. But again, I don't know. I don't know about you, Brian, but when I was that age, I made mistakes, and you try to learn from them. Hopefully one of these times, and hopefully this is the time, it finally sinks in for Vontae that he's got to be a little bit smarter about some of his decisions, because they've really all been on the road so far.
Yeah, they have. And, I don't think that CU is going to be giving up on him, after this. I mean, this offense in itself is not egregious to the point of needing to kick a guy off a team, but it's more the pattern of, okay, that's 3 times now that you made a mistake, and one of them was pretty big, driving under the influence. So you want to see him mature a little bit, but I think more than anything, what we're going to see is CU kind of putting its arm around Vontae and saying, all right, let's go, grow up a little bit, let's watch yourself, and I think they're going to stick behind him and really hope that he can get things on track in that regard, and maybe have his friends drive. I think that certainly there's been some issues, like you said, on the road, and if this is another offense, that if he already had a restricted license, maybe he won't be able to drive anyway. But you want to see him mature a little bit, because he is a talented player. He's a good kid overall, and hopefully they can just kind of put their arm around him and bring him along.
Yeah, they've got talent in that receivers room, but he might be the second, if not the 3rd best receiver in that room in terms of just overall talent. I felt like last year, I think Dimitri Stanley's kind of established him as the most explosive guy in that group. But Vontae Chenault has 4 years of eligibility remaining, and so he can do some great things at CU. Yeah,
I think so. I mean, to me, he's a starter. He's one of those outside guys. I mean, I don't know, who you would rank as the top 3, but for me, it's, I put Dimitri number 1, and I think it's a toss-up maybe between Vontae and Brendan Rice as that number 2. I mean, to me, those are the top 3 guys, and those are, who I would pencil in as the starters. Clearly Carl Durrell would not say that, because he would say it's all competition, and those guys got to go earn it. But for me, those are the top three guys. And so you need Vontae to mature a little bit and stay on the straight and narrow path now and be ready to play.
It's been a quiet offseason in terms of players getting in trouble is what I meant there. In terms of movement, it's been pretty active. Yeah. If you were just a CU fan, just looking at CU's player movement, you would say it's been a crazy offseason, but you start looking around at other Pac-12 teams, other Power 5 teams. It's become the norm now in college football with that transfer portal. And, guys are expecting that one-time transfer exemption to get passed. It's going to be the new college football going forward. You just kind of have to get used to it. It's almost kind of like college football free agency, as we've heard Carl Jarrell talk about. What are your thoughts on this? Do you think this is good for college football, given that coaches can get up and leave in the middle of the night, or has it been hard for you to kind of wrap your head around this new way of college football?
Yeah, it's a little of both. I mean, I don't think it's a great thing. I mean, on the surface, I say yes. It's they should allow players to transfer, but the difference is that when a coach leaves, and sorry to bring up this name, CU fans, but when Mel Tucker leaves, it's because he had a big contract sitting there waiting for him. I mean, we see guys that are leaving now that they don't necessarily have anywhere to go. I mean, they're putting themselves in the transfer portal, and it's not like they've got, a team that they're ready to sign with. I mean, there's a lot of these kids that, I haven't heard anything with Akeel Jones. He transferred out, and I know he was sort of, told, hey, it's time to move on, but there's no spot for him right now. I haven't seen him go anywhere. Who was a receiver last year? Braden Huffman-Dixon transferred out a year ago and didn't play anywhere last year. He didn't have anywhere to go. He couldn't find a team. So I think that's the difference, and that's where it's going to hurt a lot of these players. There's a lot of players that are going to be just fine because they're high-end talent, and they're going to find a spot right away, like a Jack Lamb, Robert Barnes who's coming here. You're always going to have a quarterback coming from the SEC like JT Shrout is going to find a spot to go play. But there's a lot of these kids that I think are going to walk away from a scholarship and perhaps not be able to finish college anywhere. So I think that's the shame in this, is that I think there's a lot of kids that are going to get hurt by it, but it does provide some opportunity for a lot of them. So I'm kind of torn on whether it's good or bad. What do you think?
Yeah, I will say this. Talking to recruits every day, the first time I talk to a recruit, I always ask them, what are you looking for in a college? What's going to help you make that decision? And there's always multiple factors, but it's always part of that is the coaches that are recruiting me and the type of relationship I'm going to have. And I don't get involved. I don't say anything. I just, take that quote and use it in my article. That's obviously the wrong approach to picking a college. You should be picking the college that you want to be at for 4 to 5 years, but they just don't do that because it's the recruiter that's in their ear every day. And that's what's going to prompt them to make that decision. But it's been extremely rare for a CU player to go through their career with the same position coach. They haven't had the same head coach. It just doesn't happen nowadays, sadly. But recruits are still making the decision based on that. So when that coach leaves, I do think they should have that opportunity to leave. I do like it only being a one-time exemption, though. If guys are transferring 2-3 times, they need to be penalized for that in terms of having to sit out. But it is what it is. And it can benefit a program. Obviously the transfer portal works both ways. And I think we've seen a pretty good trade-off in terms of the guys that are coming in, even though there's less guys coming in so far than have left CU's program. I think they've really upgraded at some spots they really needed to as a result.
Yeah, and to go back to your earlier point, I think of a guy like Ty Evans, who was originally committed to Arkansas and then decommitted, after their coaching staff was fired. He commits to CU, decommits when that staff is fired and Roper is gone, and then goes to was NC State, because of the coach there. And literally within a couple of weeks of him signing, that coach that recruited him takes a head coaching job somewhere else. So now he's going to a school, play for a coach who's not there anymore, and he's already transferred since. So, yeah, for these guys to pick based off of a coach, I think is the wrong approach. But
and that all happened during Ty Evans' recruitment. What do you think is going to happen 4 or 5 years when you're in a program?
Yeah, and like I said, we've already seen him now. He's on to a second program. So I agree with you. I like that it's one time. I just think that a lot of these kids take some time to really know what you're getting into before you transfer out. I mean, I just think there are some kids that are giving up on a scholarship that may not ever get that somewhere else. And so That's the disappointing part. Is I want to see these kids. They've got a golden opportunity here to get a good education. They all want to play. I get that, and I totally understand that. But that education piece they could be walking away from, and that's a disappointing part. And so I hope that it settles down in some respect. It's still a fairly new phenomenon here. I hope it settles down in some respects and guys have some more self-awareness of what they are. But in terms of CU, I think you're right that they've it's allowed them to kind of improve in a couple of areas that they really need it right away. And I think from a team perspective, and that's where it's like that NFL free agency. I mean, every year here in Denver, I mean, all the Denver radio talks about is the Broncos, right? So we hear it all the time. It's free agency. Okay, every time there's a free agent, let's go get him. The Broncos need to get this guy. We'll see you now in some respects. Fans are doing that. I mean, we see on the 24/7 board, right? Every time there's somebody going in the transfer portals, somebody posts, "Oh, look at this running back from Tennessee. We got to go get that guy." So it is a little bit of free agency, and it creates some excitement for the fans, but it does provide opportunities for these teams to improve right away at certain spots.
And player movement is not necessarily done at this point. We see guys transfer out after spring ball often. I expect there to be some more movement in terms of guys coming in and out of Colorado's program. I do think they're still in the transfer market. I think they need another safety. What else could you see them needing in terms of, it sounds like they're maybe in the market for an offensive lineman, whether it's a junior college or somebody that they can bring in as a grad transfer and play right away. So those are a couple spots I think they're looking at. Do you see any other holes on this roster that need to get filled before they start that 2021 season?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think defensive back, whether it's a safety or corner, I still wouldn't mind seeing a little more depth at corner, but maybe even just somebody that can come in and play all around so that you can have a hybrid defensive back there. I wouldn't be opposed to seeing another inside linebacker come in just because, outside of Landman, we know what you get with Van Diest, but I know he's working on his speed a lot and wants to improve that. But there's a lot of unproven guys there at inside linebacker, and so I wouldn't mind seeing another veteran there. Quarterback, you could always use another arm, and if you're going to go that route, I think you need to get a younger guy that's got 2-3 years left of eligibility. But I don't think there's outside of maybe another defensive back, Adam, I don't think there's really any spot that they're desperate for anybody. What do you think?
Well, quarterback, I think if Brendan Lewis and JT Shrout have good springs, I don't necessarily – I know that Carl Durrell has said, hey, ideally we'd like to have 5 scholarship quarterbacks. Yeah. They almost signed one late. But you've also got Drew Carter on campus early. I think if they do look for another quarterback in the transfer portal, maybe you worry a little bit about the quarterback position in terms of what those guys showed this spring. I think they could be okay, especially, considering that 3 of them are underclassmen. I don't know, maybe even defensive line. I think maybe you go best available. You do need to get another safety, but maybe best available from there. If you have a chance to bring in an elite level tight end to go with Brady Russell, if you can bring in another defensive lineman, there's a lot of bodies on that defensive line, but outside of Terrence Lang and Jalen Sami and I guess a little bit Janaz Jordan, there's still a lot of unproven guys in that mix as well. So it's hard to say until you know exactly who's available and what their interest level is. So maybe you do go best available. There's not a lot of spots that you couldn't use any help. I think running back's probably one where you wouldn't want to add another body to that room.
Yeah, and to your point on tight end, I mean there's a lot of bodies there as well, but there's a lot of unproven guys, and that's where I would hesitate in adding a tight end, is that you've already got a lot of scholarship guys there, but there's so many unproven guys there outside of Brady that you almost want to see a proven guy come in. And last year they added a couple, transfers, like the kid from D3 that just he wasn't a scholarship guy, he was a walk-on, but you almost need a D1 transfer if you're going to add a tight end there. But I agree with you. Best available, if there's somebody that you feel like can really help you at a spot and get you better at offensive line. I don't think they necessarily need an offensive lineman. I kind of like the group they have. But if you can get somebody that you feel can help you, then you go get it.
A year ago, Carl Durrell was still putting his staff together, trying to keep that 2020 class together. They hadn't really been able to hit the ground running with 2021 recruiting, and then the pandemic hits. And so we've talked about all the challenges they faced with 2021 recruiting. But you fast forward to this year, they've got 256 offers out to 2022 prospects. They've done tons of virtual visits. Obviously, they haven't been able to get kids on campus. The dead period's extended through May. From what I'm hearing, though, Brian, it sounds like most college coaches are pretty confident that beginning in June, you're going to be able to start bringing recruits out on campus. So they're in a much better spot with recruiting this time around. They've got 2 commits already. Dylan Dixon's a 24/7 sports composite, 4-star prospect. Not necessarily talking about specific recruits here, Brian, but what are just kind of your big picture thoughts on how recruiting is maybe a little bit different with Karl Dorrell this year as compared to a year ago?
Yeah, I think it's unfortunate for the kids, first off, that this period keeps getting pushed back. I don't think there's, at this point in time, I traveled a little bit during the season, and that's when things were, a little tougher as far as the pandemic. I think at this point in time, we've shown that there's ways you can be safe and do these things. I mean, they're allowing fans at games now. There's no reason you can't bring a recruit onto campus, and I think it's unfortunate they have to wait until June at least. So, but I think you're right in that now the staff gets a full cycle. I'd like to see what they can do with it. I really like Dylan Dixon. I think he looks like a pretty good talent. I'm curious to see what they do with a full cycle, and certainly they're able to kind of spread their their offers out quite a bit now. The staff is familiar with who they want, and so I had somebody ask me if it's a good thing or a bad thing that they've offered so many kids. I think it's a good thing. I mean, just get offers out there and see what happens. But I know a concern, Adam, for one fan that asked me is there a concern that you offer all these kids and you have a lower tier guy commit and they don't have room for maybe a higher tier guy that wants to commit? What's your thought on that?
Well, when you take on a commitment, it's not binding, right, until that letter of intent signed. And that's from both sides of things. So if that recruit doesn't continue to develop and they don't feel as good about him this coming September, coming October, and they've got another guy they can bring in, they feel has developed better, is maybe more highly rated, they can make changes. They're not locked into that. So I know with Carlton Madden, the second player that's committed in that 2022 class, there's some concerns that he doesn't have other Power 5 offers. The reason he doesn't is because he was only allowed to play in one game last year due to a transfer ruling. So there's just not a lot of film on that.
It was a JV game.
So I actually really like everything I've heard about him. And I think Carlton Madden is a guy that, had he been able to play a full season his junior year out there in Georgia, he would have a ton of offers. So that maybe is a different case. So I would say right now with 2 commits, maybe you're jumping the gun on that concern there. I do think this class will look quite a bit better on paper than maybe their 2021 class did.
It's going to be interesting, though. I'm curious what you think as far as how big this class can be. It's tough for this staff, I think, to gauge that because there's only 3 guys on this team that are seniors that have to leave after this year, right? You could have almost the entire team back next year outside of Neuer, Landman, and Kari Kutch. So how hard is it, do you feel like, to gauge? I mean, there's all the 256 offers out, but how many can you actually bring in? I mean, I don't think it's going to be a full class, is it?
No, and I don't think you're going to see many programs that have big classes because there is kind of this backlog as a result of eligibility not counting in 2020. So it's not just specific to CU. They will sign more than you think they can, right? That's always the case because there's going to be player movement. So they'll end up, I don't know, signing between 15 and 20 guys and somehow make those numbers work. Right now, you sit here and try to make that work. It's going to be really difficult to figure it out. But that's going to be the case with other programs, like I said.
Yeah, I think you and I joke every year about the numbers that it always seems like after signing day, there's concern of, man, they've got 95 guys signed. How are they going to make this work? And they always end up with about 83 scholarship guys, right? Something happens where they're under the number. Right now, I'm trying to look. They're 91 is what I have. Is that what you have?
Yeah.
91 projected scholarship. They can have 88 this year because of Neuer, Kutch, and Landman coming back. They don't really count against that 85. So they've got to have some attrition here. And, fans always ask me, I'm sure they ask you, where's that attrition going to come from? We don't know, but something's going to happen, right? There's going to be guys that transfer out after the spring and things like that. But What I do feel confident saying is that when fall hits, there are going to be one or two guys under that number, because they're always under that number, and we wind up, often seeing a walk-on or two get a scholarship to make up that number. So you're right. I mean, who knows how many they sign this next year, but somehow going into the fall of 2022, they're going to have 84, 83 guys, when it comes down to it. So it'll be interesting to see how many they actually sign, though.
It's great that the California kids are finally going to get a chance to get out there, compete, get some new film. Their spring seasons are going to start here later in March. And for those guys, the last time they played football, if they were lucky to make a deep championship type run, was early December of 2019. So it's been almost a year and a half since those kids have been able to get good new film. There was a little bit of a club circuit going on. Some guys participated in that. What's going to be interesting here, Brian, is there's been guys out in California that have developed physically quite a bit since November/early December of 2019 to now. You might find some schools trying to find late scholarships for 2021 recruits that really blow up during the spring season out in California.
Yeah, California and other states. I mean, I know a lot of football was played here in Colorado, but there's a spring season. So are there some teams around here and some guys that are late bloomers on recruiting? So, this whole year is interesting and makes it weird, but it'll be interesting to see what happens with California. I'm sure CU's coaches are going to have all their eyes on what's going on in those California schools, and maybe you can find that guy, because every year we see guys that have a great senior year and earn that scholarship, right? And these guys just haven't had a chance to do that. So there's probably, I don't even know what the number would be, but there's got to be couple dozen guys that earn a scholarship based off what they do this spring.
You recently had a chance to catch up with John Wooten, who was an All-American at CU in the late 50s. I think it was the second African-American player in program history, correct?
Yeah, by a year. He and Frank Clark came in the same year, 1955, I believe. But Frank was a transfer from Trinidad Junior College. He could play right away, whereas John Wooten was a freshman, and so freshmen didn't play then. So they came in the same year, but Frank Clark was the first varsity black player on the CU's football team, and then John came the next year. Such an awesome conversation, and the podcast is still up there that I did with him, and I encourage my fans to listen to that. He was so good talking about not only some of his memories from CU, but we talked a lot, because it was Black History Month, about his fight for civil rights throughout his life. Adam, he's one of the more interesting guys I've ever interviewed. I mean, this was a guy that played with Jim Brown, but he and Jim Brown did a lot for civil rights back in the 50s and 60s in Cleveland. And he knew Muhammad Ali. He knew Martin Luther King Jr. He told me stories about, when Martin Luther King Jr. would come to Cleveland, he'd go pick him up at the airport. MLK brought him to Washington, D.C. at one point when Lyndon B. Johnson signed a Voting Rights Act. So, to listen to somebody that knew these people that we've only heard about, right? Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated before I was even born, but to listen to him, talk about these guys as he knew them, he was friends with them. It's fascinating to listen to, and he gives a lot of insight on coaching. He's done a lot for black coaches, not only head coaches, but in the assistant coaches, things like that. We talked about Eric Bieniemy and things like that. So I encourage fans to give that a listen, just because he's 88 years old with such a sharp mind, and he's done a lot, and he's an all-time great buff. But for me, Adam, this is a guy that should be considered for the Pro Football Hall of Fame as a contributor because of what he's done, and just awesome man. So I encourage anyone to go listen to that podcast.
Yeah, it's great stuff. And before we sign off here, Brian, Will Sherman just got an invitation to participate in the NFL Combine. It's not going to be done in Indianapolis. It sounds like it's basically going to be done virtually. How big of a deal is that as compared to just having a regular pro day?
Yeah, it's interesting because from what I understand, it's basically the NFL teams will get a chance to watch a video of Will Sherman's pro day at CU. It's going to take place at CU, but more so, it sounds like there's going to be media availability set up for NFL media with Will. virtually, and they'll have access to certain things with him. And but CU's gonna have a pro day, but it's really only two guys. It's Will Sherman and Mustafa Johnson. So I would imagine with only two guys, can Mustafa get seen as well? During all that, I don't know, but are all eyes just going to be on Will? But good for Will. I mean, I don't know what it's going to look like, what it means this year as opposed to other years. In other years, obviously, it's a huge deal to get that combine invite. But for Will, I think more than anything, that means he's on the NFL radar. And, hopefully Mustafa is as well. I think both those guys could be late round draft picks, but good thing for Will Sherman.
Well, spring ball's set to kick off later this month. We should come back, do some previews for that. It sounds like we might get a chance to do some Zoom interviews with the new assistant coaches at CU. That would be great. Brian, it was great catching up, and let's do this again before they kick off spring ball.
Sounds good. I'm looking forward to some spring ball. It'll be nice it'll be our first time in 3 months seeing this team, if we get to see them. But first time in 3 months being able to cover the team a little bit.
Yeah, we're still not out of this pandemic yet, but we're slowly inching closer. Last year, no spring ball at all, so it'll be great to cover those practices. Thanks, everybody, for tuning into this video.